Hello guys, welcome back to narsicloud.com. So far we have discussed about how to access AWS resources using user password by logging into the AWS console and AWS credentials, which are AWS access key ID and secret access key. And there is other way that you can access resources, which is using IAM role. Today's topic is using IAM role. How can we access one of our AWS resources from EC2? So that's what our demo for today. So if you look at IAM, we have a concept called roles. What is IAM role? So that is, you can see the description here. There is a secure way to grant permissions to the entities that you trust. So what are those entities? If you look at those entities, they list down here that I am user. So one of the users, any user can be one of those entities that you can assign roles to that user, so that that user will get permission to access the resources. And it could be application code, which could be running in any one of those EC2 instances, and it could be any other AWS service that can use this role and access the other resources. For example, EC2 instance can access S3. So likewise, any service can act on other resources, and it could be users from corporate directory. So if you have a company and you got a lot of users in your Active Directory, and if those users wants to access AWS resources, then we can use this role to give permissions to those users, so that you don't have to create all of those users under AWS account. So that is the concept. So for today we have this role created. To save some time, I created the role which is test EC2 role. And if you look at EC2 role, we attached policy to that role. Okay, so role creation is pretty simple, but I can go over that in our later video. But today, assume that role is created and we attached policies to that, right? The policy has permissions. I gave permissions, all permissions that this role, whoever uses this role, they will get permission to act on S3. They can do any action, and they can access any resource under S3. So that's what the permission. So we gave this permission to role. So if you look at diagrammatically, what does it look like is, so let's say we have IAM role. Okay, so we have IAM role, and we attach policies to it. So policy has permissions, right? So let's assume this is policy. Okay, we got permissions to this, and we attach this policy to this role. So far that doesn't do anything, right? The role itself cannot do anything. So it's just a container which has permissions to it. Now let's assume that we have EC2 instance here, and we want this EC2 instance to access one of our resources. Okay, so this is EC2 instance machine. So this is one of those machines that is running in the cloud. So how can this machine access S3 here? So one way EC2 machine can access this resource is using access key ID and secret. So how can we get those credentials here? We can log into EC2 machine, and we can configure those credentials so that it will have those permissions, right? But it's not scalable, right? So EC2 machine is just a single machine right now, but if you look at EC2 concepts, it can scale. It is elastic in nature, right? It will scale up or scale down, which means number of new instances will spin up, and they will go down as needed by the application, right? As the traffic increases, those things will happen. but since that's not scalable, we cannot copy those credentials to every machine that spins up, right? So what is the other way that we can do? So we need a way. The problem is, whenever EC2 instances spins up, it should automatically get those permissions without any manual intervention. So for EC2, that is one of the scenarios, right? So let's see how could we use a role to solve that problem. That is one of the uses of roles. So basically, it will let you assume the role. So here we created a role and we attached permissions to that, right? Any entity in that under IAM can assume that role. So what are those entities? If you look at here under roles, these entities can assume that role so that they will get those permissions. What is assuming role? It is pretty much like in the movie. So every actor has some roles, right? Based on the role, they can do some few things. Likewise, anybody who assumes that role, they will get those permissions. What are those permissions? The permissions that are attached to that role. So here in our example, we gave permissions to access the S3. So when we attach this role to this EC2 machine, then it automatically gets those permissions. So let's see how does that work. So right now, let's go to EC2. So let's start that. If you look at security, it doesn't have any IAM role. So right now, this machine is exactly like this. It is one independent machine which doesn't have any role or permissions attached. So let's go ahead and start that machine. Manage instance state. And so if you are new to EC2 machine creation, you can look at my previous videos. There are a lot of concepts I explained about how to create EC2 machine and security groups and all that. Okay, so it is running right now. Okay, so it doesn't have any role attached. So let's log into this EC2 machine and let's log in. So this is the way that you would do SSH to EC2 instance. Yes. So now we are in this machine, which is we did SSH onto this EC2 machine. So diagrammatically, let's try to access AWS S3. Okay, so by default, EC2 machine will have all these AWS CLI tools installed, so you don't have to do anything. As soon as you create EC2 instance, you will have those available. Okay, so what is the command to access S3? AWS3 ls, and let's access one of those buckets which is in S3. So let's try to do ls on this bucket. Okay, so here n destro bucket. So if you do that, by default it's saying unable to locate credentials. You can configure credentials by running AWS configure, right? Like I was saying before, one other way that you can access S3 is by configuring credentials. So we don't want to do that because as this scale up or scale down, we don't want to configure that, right? So let's see the other way. How could we use this role? How could we attach this role to EC2 so that we can get access, right? Let's go to IAM and under roles. So it says this is good, and so now the next step is we need to attach that IAM role, right? How do we attach IAM role to EC2 instance? Let's go to EC2 instance, select that, under actions, go to security, modify IAM role. Since this doesn't have any IAM role right now, that shows empty. Now click on save. Now what we did diagrammatically, we attached this role to EC2 machine, which means you should be able to access S3, right? Let's run that command again. Okay, let's run this command. See, it's not throwing any error, right? It's able to access that. So if I go ahead and detach the role and try to access that, then it would throw that error again. Okay, so if we go to IAM role and no IAM role, save that, which means detach. We're specifically detaching that role, which means here we detached this role from the EC2 machine. Now let's run that command. So it's unable to, it's again throwing that error. So what happened really here? So we attach the role, and when we run this command, we're using AWS CLI. So behind the scenes, what it does is it will call one other service called secure token service endpoint, and that will give temporary credentials. So those are the credentials that EC2 machine is using to access this S3. So if you look at IAM role here, under IAM, go to the roles. So this is what happens. IAM roles issue keys that are valid for short durations, making them more secure way to grant access. That's what happened really behind the scenes. As soon as you run this command, it calls that STS secure token service endpoint. It gets the credentials, and using those credentials and whatever permissions you attach to this role, those credentials will get those permissions, and that's why we're able to access S3. See how easy it is. Roles are very powerful. So in most of the real-time scenarios, we use roles a lot. It's very rare that you would use console password by logging into console and do manual stuff. But I mean, for day-to-day activities, you'll do that as a user. But most of from the applications, either you would use access key ID and secret, or you would use roles to perform or access resources in AWS and do those actions on that. Just to summarize, what we discussed today is previously we discussed about before this video we discussed about how do we access resources using password and credentials. What are those credentials? Access key ID and secret access key. And today we discussed about how do we access these resources using role. What is role? Role is another way that you can grant permissions, and we attach policies to the role so that anybody who assumes that role will get those permissions. And in this demo, we created EC2 machine. I mean, it's already created, but we used one of those EC2 machines. First, we tried to access S3 without attaching any role to it, and we got error, right? We got 403 denied. And we attached this role which has S3 permissions, and we tried to access S3 and we were successful. So now we know how to use role. Okay, so that's all guys, and we'll meet in our next video. And if you do like this video, please click on like button, and please do subscribe. And in the next few videos we'll be finishing up this first stage of AWS course, which is AWS core concepts, and after that I will go over deep into individual services. Okay, meet you guys later in the next video. See you, bye.